Hi there and welcome to the installation video for the oil catch can that I've produced for the 2015 and on Mustang GT 5 litre. So installation of this kit should only require 5 tools: a 7mm socket, a flathead screwdriver, a 17mm wrench or spanner, a 15mm deep socket, and a 2.5 hex bit or Allen bit, and of course a set of gloves just to aid with the grip of things. So within your kit you should have 4 pieces: the inlet hose, outlet hose, both with quick connect fittings, the oil catch can itself, and of course the mounting bracket. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove your engine cover. Now there's no bolts to remove this, simply pull straight up on this end piece and then the cover comes straight off. Next you're going to want to locate the oil line or PCV line going from the cylinder head right the way around to the intake. Now on my particular car I use this line for R&D, but there will normally be a line connecting onto here, looping around here, and going onto this black intake nozzle here. To disconnect this line, it's nice and simple with this quick connector. You simply find this grey tab. You can put it down either with your finger if you can get access, or with a screwdriver. Pull it down and that will open up the connector for you to pull it straight off. If I show you from the front angle, as you pull down the connector you'll notice it widens the gap, giving you the ability to pull it off both the cylinder head side and the intake side. Now what you want to do is locate the oil catch can from your kit and the small inlet hose. Take the hose and screw it into the inlet port, making sure you don't strip your threads as it goes in. But don't worry about tightening this up completely just yet. Next, locate the longer out hose and do exactly the same thing, installing it into the out port on the oil catch can. Again, just tightening it finger tight because we're going to tighten it shortly. Next up, you want to grab yourself a 17mm spanner or wrench and just tighten down the fittings on the oil catch can until they're nice and firm. Be careful not to over tighten, you don't need to go crazy with this, but just to a point where they're nice and snug and they're not going to come loose. Now at this point it's important to remember that the fittings on your catch can may not be pointing in the right directions, but don't worry, we're going to be loosening off these Jubilee clips shortly to make sure they're in the right position to be able to install the catch can onto the engine. Now next up you're going to want to locate the driver's side strut. Now you'll notice there are multiple bolts. We are going to be specifically targeting this bolt here. Now if you have got a strut brace you can remove it and install the bracket underneath. Alternatively you can install the bracket on this strut here, which is part of the upper suspension mount, but it's entirely up to you. Personally I would recommend this one, but like I said, if you have a particular strut brace across you might need to find an alternative. Now what you're going to need to do is grab yourself your 15mm deep socket and undo this bolt. And be very careful not to drop this one in the engine bay. Next, you're going to want to locate your catch can bracket. Looks like this. Now it can be installed either way, and of course you can also adjust the fittings here to place the bracket upside down if you'd like to mount it lower. But we're going to take your bracket and slide it over this nut. Now it should be a relatively snug fit, and so the bracket should sit there quite nicely like that. Now what we're going to do is put this nut back on, but we're not going to tighten it down all the way. We're just going to take it so that we've got the ability to snug it later on, and of course you may need to use your socket to do this. So as you can now see, we've got about 1mm or 2 of gap just to give you a little bit of wiggle room as far as the bracket goes, and we'll tighten that down properly shortly. Now using your 2.5 hex bit, we're going to remove the bolts from the top of the oil catch can and place them to one side, being very careful not to drop them. This is also the time you're going to want to grab a 7mm socket or a flathead screwdriver to loosen the Jubilee clamp, the end of the quick connect connector, to give you the ability to rotate it so you can orientate it properly with the engine. Now very simply, we're going to want to locate the long end of the quick connect or the long hose on the catch can and rotate the quick connect so it orientates straight down, and we're then going to place that onto the quick connector next to the engine here and push it down until it clips. We're then going to do exactly the same with the shorter end of the catch can on the quick connect end on the cylinder head. Push it down till it clicks. At this point, it's important to note that because of the difference between 15 and 18 model year cars, I have included a little bit of extra hose just in case you need to manipulate things to fit your engine bay a little bit better. Now, of course, you can always undo one of the Jubilee clips, move them further down, remove the hose from the connector at the oil catch can end, simply because it's easier to remove this end from the hose, trim a little bit of the hose off using a Stanley knife, and then of course reconnecting it if you'd prefer. But I wanted to send the kits out with a little bit of extra hose just in case you guys wanted to tweak the fitment for your own individual needs. Now, depending on the angle of your bracket, and of course if you've adjusted the length of your hoses, the angle of this hose here may change, but what's important to remember is that there's no kinks in the hose, either one of course, and of course that there's no adverse stress on the PCV valve here. Once you're assured of that, grab your bracket, and of course you'll want to locate one of your small oil catch can screws. Be very careful not to drop this into the engine bay, and then simply very carefully install one of those screws back into the top of the oil catch can to hold it in place. Once that's in, you'll be free to grab the other screw and do exactly the same. So at this point, the installation of your catch can is almost complete. What you will want to make sure you do is just tighten up your Jubilee clamps just to ensure they are fitted on there nice and snug. Now, you can of course rotate the Jubilee clamps if you want as well for more aesthetic reasons, but of course that's entirely up to you. It doesn't matter what orientation they're facing, as long as of course they're easy to get to. Be sure now to tighten the nuts on the top of the oil catch can. Again, nothing crazy, just until they're snug and not going to come loose. Now, the final thing to do just before we snug down this particular bolt is just make sure you're happy with the oil catch can placement. It should be in there pretty snug, but of course we don't want it flapping around wildly whilst you are driving along. So just make sure that it's all nice and secure. And then of course take your deep socket 15 and tighten down this bolt. Now again, it doesn't need to be super tight. You have got the other bolt for backup, and of course with this particular bolt, although it is holding the strut brace in, it doesn't need to be torqued to any ridiculous settings. You just want to make sure that it's snug, and of course it's not going to come loose. Bear in mind this bracket is made of aluminium, so you want to make sure that you aren't too aggressive with it, because it will crush between the bolt and the top of the strut tower. Now, before we reinstall the engine cover, it's always good practice at this point to just go around checking all the fitments to make sure that all the Jubilee clips are tight, to make sure that the fittings are connected properly, and of course to make sure that nothing is fouling on any kind of belts, cables, etc., just to make sure that you've got a nice tidy install. As I said, once that bolt is tightened down, you should find the catch can is in there nice and sturdily. Then of course it's time to reinstall the engine cover. These simply push down into the designated rubber clips on top of the engine at all 4 points. And there we go, your installation is complete. Now, in terms of maintenance and emptying the oil catch can, I would recommend that as you're getting used to it, I would check it once a week. Obviously you don't need to empty it once a week, but it's just to gauge how much oil is actually being collected. To empty it, it's nice and simple, you don't have to undo anything. They should simply have enough room underneath to be able to unscrew the bottom part of the can, being very careful to not drop it into the engine bay, and simply pull the can bottom directly down over the baffle and then around the side and out of the engine bay to then be emptied. And then of course reinstall is the reverse of that process. And there we go, it's as simple as that. I just want to say at this point, obviously, because it is a DIY installation, that you do install this product at your own risk. I am not liable for anything that happens with regards to the installation, and of course anything that happens to your car thereafter. But I want to say a big thank you for ordering one of my kits, and of course a big thank you for supporting the development of it. There are too many kits out there from big name brands that are hundreds of pounds, and so my goal with this kit was to give you the same level of quality with the baffles, the bronze filter, etc., OEM connectors for a much lower price. So I hope you enjoy the kits. Obviously, if you can share this information with other people, with other Mustang owners, so if they wanted to grab an oil catch can to prolong the life of their engine, then of course send them my way so they can save some money. And again, thank you ever so much. I hope you enjoy the kit.